What you are about to see is one of those stories that seem impossible. A lynx, severely injured, without even the strength to stand up, surprised everyone when it saw its owner's tears. What it did in that moment defied logic and moved even the most experienced veterinarians. Get ready, because this story will touch you in ways you cannot imagine, and the ending is even more unbelievable. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single detail of this emotional twist. Evelyn Morgans. Breath formed delicate clouds in the crisp Montana air as she stood on the porch of her cabin. 3 years had passed since she'd retreated to the wilderness of the Bitterroot Mountains, seeking solace among the pines and pristine snowfields that stretched beyond her modest homestead. The locals in the small town of Pinecrest, 15 miles down the mountain, hardly remembered her now, just a whispered story of the woman who'd abandoned civilization after losing her husband in a tragic accident. The first rays of sun crested over the eastern peaks, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of gold and pink. This morning ritual, watching the mountains awaken, was one of the few constants in Evelyn's deliberately simple existence. Her days followed the natural rhythm of the seasons, gathering firewood in autumn, preserving wild berries in summer, and surviving the harsh isolation of winter when heavy snows often cut her off from the world below. "Another day," she whispered to herself, running her fingers through her chestnut hair, now streaked with strands of silver that hadn't been there 3 years ago. At 38, Evelyn had learned to embrace solitude as a companion rather than an enemy. She stepped back inside, the warmth from her wood stove embracing her like an old friend. Her cabin, though small, contained everything she needed. Stacked. Bookshelves filled with well-worn classics, a collection of hand-carved wooden animals she'd started crafting to pass the time, and photographs she couldn't bear to look at but couldn't bring herself to put away. As she prepared her morning tea, a flicker of movement outside the kitchen window caught her attention. Evelyn froze, teacup suspended mid-air, as she glimpsed a shadow slipping between the trees at the edge of her clearing. For a moment, she thought it might be one of the local rangers checking on her. Jack Peterson sometimes made the trek up to ensure she was surviving. But this silhouette was different. Lower to the ground, more fluid in its movement. Setting down her cup, Evelyn moved cautiously to the window. There, just at the tree line, stood a creature she'd heard about but never expected to see. A North American lynx, its tufted ears alert, its silvery grey coat nearly camouflaged against the snow. Their eyes met across the distance, amber against blue, and Evelyn felt something shift inside her, a connection as tangible as a physical touch. "My God," she breathed, careful not to move suddenly. The lynx was rare in these parts, its population dwindling due to habitat loss. The locals spoke of them in reverential tones, claiming sightings were omens of change. The moment stretched between them until, with a flick of its tasseled ears, the lynx disappeared into the forest, leaving nothing but paw prints in the fresh snow. That encounter marked the beginning. Over the following weeks, Evelyn noticed signs of the lynx's presence. Tracks circling her cabin in the night, the remains of a rabbit near her woodpile, a gift, perhaps. She began leaving small offerings of her own, scraps of venison from the deer Jack had brought her last hunting season, placed on a flat rock at the forest's edge. Each morning the food was gone, and sometimes, if she was patient enough, she caught glimpses of her silent companion watching from the trees. Winter deepened around them. February brought storms that piled snow against her cabin walls and howling winds that made the old timbers creak in protest. During one particularly fierce blizzard, Evelyn awoke to a soft scratching at her door. Heart pounding, she approached cautiously, rifle in hand. The mountains housed predators far less welcome than her lynx friend. When she cracked open the door, the lynx stood on her porch unfazed by the swirling snow. Its amber eyes held hers for a long moment before it turned and walked a few paces away, looking back, as if expecting her to follow. "You want me to come out? In this?" Evelyn asked incredulously, gesturing to the storm. The lynx merely stared, its meaning somehow clear despite the absence of words. Against all logic, Evelyn bundled herself in her thickest coat and boots and stepped into the blizzard. The lynx led her through the whirling whiteness, staying just close enough that she could follow its shadowy form. After 10 minutes of trudging, through snow nearly to her knees, they reached a fallen pine tree, its massive trunk creating a natural shelter. Beneath it, huddled and trembling, was a young fox, its leg crushed beneath a broken branch. The lynx turned to Evelyn, and the message was unmistakable. "Help." "So you're not just visiting for the free food," Evelyn murmured, kneeling beside the injured fox. "You're bringing me patience now." Using skills she'd learned from necessity during her years in the wilderness, Evelyn freed the fox and carried it back to her cabin, the lynx following silently behind. For 3 days, she nursed the small creature, splinting its broken leg and feeding it from a dropper until it was strong enough to return to the wild. The lynx watched this process with solemn attention, never entering the cabin, but remaining on the porch, peering through the window with unnerving intelligence. On the morning Evelyn released the fox, the lynx approached closer than ever before, allowing her within arm's reach before padding after the healed fox into the forest. That spring, something changed in their relationship. The lynx, whom Evelyn had begun calling Shadow for his silent comings and goings, started appearing during daylight hours, sometimes lounging on her porch while she worked in her small garden. By the second summer, he would accept food directly from her outstretched hand, his rough tongue tickling her palm as he delicately took each morsel. "You know, people in town wouldn't believe this," Evelyn told Shadow one evening as they sat together on her porch steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues. "Jack thinks I'm crazy enough already, living up here alone. If he knew I was having conversations with a wild lynx, he'd have me committed for sure." Shadow blinked slowly at her, his heavy paws crossed in front of him in a decidedly domestic posture that always made Evelyn smile. In his presence, the crushing weight of loneliness that had driven her to the mountains seemed lighter somehow, as if shared between them. Autumn came again, the third since Shadow had entered her life. The maples and aspens surrendered their leaves in spectacular displays of gold and crimson. Evelyn spent long days foraging for the last berries, gathering herbs, and preparing her cabin for the coming winter. Shadow often accompanied her on these excursions, sometimes disappearing for hours to hunt before rejoining her silently, materializing from the forest like a ghost. One crisp October morning, Evelyn awoke to find Shadow wasn't in his usual spot on the porch. She thought little of it. He came and went as his wild nature dictated. But when 3 days passed without a sign of him, a knot of worry formed in her stomach. "He's fine," she told herself firmly, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. "He's a wild animal. He doesn't need to check in." But as the days stretched into a week and then 2, Evelyn found herself straining to hear the familiar soft padding of paws on her porch. The silence that greeted her instead grew more ominous with each passing day. By the first snowfall in early November, Shadow had been gone for nearly a month, and Evelyn could no longer deny the fear that had taken root in her heart. Something was wrong. The lynx that had become her closest companion, the creature that had somehow pieced together parts of her broken heart, wouldn't have disappeared without reason. Standing at the edge of her clearing, snowflakes melting in her hair, Evelyn made a decision. She would find Shadow, whatever it took. She hadn't fought for the things she loved in the past. This time would be different. The first serious storm of winter descended on the Bitterroot Mountains with merciless intensity. Wind howled through the pines as Evelyn finished packing her rucksack with supplies: rope, first aid kit, Jerky, water, flares, and a satellite phone that Jack had insisted she keep for emergencies, though she'd never used it. She dressed in layers, her movements methodical despite the trembling in her hands. "This is insane," she muttered, securing her snowshoes by the door. "Normal people don't track wild lynxes through blizzards." But normal people hadn't spent 3 years building a relationship with a creature that understood her in ways no human had bothered to try. Dawn brought a temporary lull in the storm, and Evelyn seized her chance. She secured her cabin, slipped the emergency locator beacon into her pocket, another of Jack's well-meaning gifts, and stepped into a world transformed by snow. Tracking. Shadow would have been nearly impossible if not for Evelyn's intimate knowledge of his habits. She headed north toward the ridge where he often hunted, searching for any sign of his distinctive paw prints. The fresh snow had erased most tracks, but Evelyn pressed on, guided more by intuition than evidence. By midday, the storm threatened to return, dark clouds gathering over the western peaks. Evelyn paused on a rocky outcrop, scanning the valley below. The wilderness stretched endlessly, indifferent to her quest. For the first time, doubt crept in. How could she possibly find one lynx in this vast expanse? A faint sound carried on the wind, not the howl of the coming storm, but something more plaintive. Evelyn held her breath, straining to hear. There it came again, a cry so faint she almost dismissed it as imagination. She scrambled down from the outcrop, snowshoes sliding on the steep slope, as she followed the sound to a ravine she knew well. A shortcut she and Shadow had taken many times during their wanderings. Peering over the edge, her heart stopped. 20 feet below, trapped on a narrow ledge, lay Shadow. Even from this distance, Evelyn could see he was injured. His normally immaculate coat matted with blood on one side. One of his legs was caught in what appeared to be a trap, illegal in these protected forests. Shadow! The name tore from her throat, and the lynx's head lifted weakly. His amber eyes, once so bright, found hers, and Evelyn saw recognition flicker in their depths. The ravine walls were steep but navigable. Without hesitation, Evelyn secured her rope to a sturdy pine and began her descent. Loose rocks skittered down as she carefully lowered herself, acutely aware that a fall would help neither of them. When her feet finally touched the narrow ledge, she moved slowly toward the injured lynx, speaking in the soft, steady voice she'd used during their earliest encounters. "It's okay, boy, I'm here now. We're going to get you out of this." Shadow watched her approach, ears flattened against his head, but made no move to retreat. Whether from trust or weakness, Evelyn couldn't tell. As she knelt beside him, the full extent of his injuries became clear. The trap, a cruel metal contraption, had clamped around his right front leg. He'd clearly been struggling for days, weakening himself further with each attempt to break free. Rage burned through Evelyn. These traps had been outlawed decades ago, yet someone had deliberately set this one in protected wilderness. She pushed, her anger aside, focusing instead on Shadow's immediate needs. "This is going to hurt," she warned, removing her gloves to better manipulate the trap's mechanism. Shadow's eyes never left hers as she worked, his trust so complete it brought tears to her eyes. When the trap finally released, Shadow made no sound, though Evelyn felt his body tense beneath her hands. She quickly examined the damaged leg. Deep lacerations, but no obvious fractures. Applying antiseptic and bandages from her first aid kit, she worked efficiently, all the while maintaining a steady stream of reassuring words. "We need to get you home, but I can't carry you up that rope," she said, glancing at the steep ascent. "We'll have to find another way out of this ravine." The gathering storm made their situation increasingly precarious. Evelyn knew they had perhaps an hour before visibility would drop to zero. She scanned the ravine, noting that it narrowed further down, potentially providing an easier climb out. Shadow attempted to stand, but collapsed immediately, too weak from blood loss and days without food. Without hesitation, Evelyn removed her heavy coat, laid it flat, and carefully maneuvered the lynx onto it. "This isn't going to be comfortable for either of us," she warned, gripping the edges of the coat to create a makeshift sled. "But we don't have much choice." Dragging Shadow along the ledge, Evelyn moved cautiously toward the narrower section of the ravine. The wind picked up, driving snow into her face and making visibility increasingly difficult. By the time they reached a potentially climbable slope, the storm had returned in full force. Evelyn assessed their options grimly. Climbing out now, in near whiteout conditions, risked both their lives. Staying put meant exposure to the elements. The ledge offered minimal protection, but perhaps enough to survive until the storm passed. "Change of plans," she told Shadow, who blinked slowly in response. "We're setting up camp." Using techniques learned during her years in the wilderness, Evelyn created a rudimentary shelter against the ravine wall. She covered Shadow with emergency thermal blankets from her pack, then huddled close to share what body heat she could. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted, and the storm intensified, screaming down the ravine like a living thing. Through the long night, Evelyn drifted in and out of consciousness, always waking to check on Shadow. His breathing remained steady but shallow, his body unnaturally hot against hers. Fever had set in, infection from the trap wounds. Without proper antibiotics, Evelyn knew his chances diminished with each passing hour. "You can't leave me now," she whispered fiercely into his fur. "Not after everything. Do you hear me? You're the only friend I have left in this world." The confession, spoken aloud for the first time, cracked something open inside her. Words poured out, years of unspoken, grief and loneliness finding voice in the howling darkness. "Before you, I was just existing. After James died, I couldn't bear to stay in that empty house, surrounded by people who didn't understand why I couldn't just move on. They wanted the old Evelyn back, but she was gone." She stroked Shadow's head gently. "Up here with you, I found pieces of myself again. Not the same, but something real." The storm raged on as Evelyn continued her one-sided conversation, telling Shadow about her life before the mountains, her career as a wildlife photographer, her marriage to James, their dreams of the family they never had. She spoke of her guilt at surviving when he hadn't, of the relief she'd found in the solitude of the mountains, and finally, of the unexpected companionship she'd found with a wild lynx. "So you see," she concluded, her voice hoarse, "you have to fight, because I can't lose you too." Dawn brought a temporary lull in the storm. Evelyn, stiff with cold, peered out from their shelter. The ravine was transformed, snowdrifts piled against the walls. But the precipitation had stopped for the moment. This might be their only chance. She turned to check on Shadow and found his amber eyes open, watching her with an intensity that took her breath away. Something had changed during the night, a new awareness in his gaze that transcended their previous connection. "You heard me," she whispered, and though it was impossible, she could have sworn he nodded slightly. With renewed determination, Evelyn repacked her supplies and carefully rewrapped Shadow in her coat. He seemed marginally stronger, even attempting to help as she positioned him for the climb. The ascent was grueling. Evelyn half-dragged, half-carried the injured lynx up the least steep section of the ravine, digging footholds in the snow with each step. Shadow, despite his weakened state, seemed to understand the need to remain still during the precarious climb. When they finally crested the rim, Evelyn collapsed beside Shadow, gulping in the frigid air. The forest stretched before them, transformed into a crystalline wonderland by the storm, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. "We're not home yet," she told Shadow, who responded with a weak attempt at his usual ear twitch. "But we're halfway there." As Evelyn prepared for the final leg of their journey, she noticed something glinting in the snow near where Shadow had been lying. Brushing away the powder, her fingers closed around a familiar object, her silver bracelet, the one her grandmother had given her on her 16th birthday, which she'd thought lost months ago during a foraging expedition. Frowning in confusion, she held it up, watching sunlight dance across the intricate Celtic knotwork. How had it gotten here, miles from her cabin? Then understanding dawned as she looked at Shadow. The lynx's eyes were fixed on the bracelet, an almost human expression of satisfaction in their amber depths. Somehow, impossibly, he had found it and been attempting to return it to her when he'd been caught in the trap. Evelyn's throat tightened as she slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. "You were bringing this back to me," she whispered. "That's why you disappeared." Shadow blinked slowly in what she could only interpret as confirmation. In that moment, the last barriers between human and wild fell away, leaving only two souls bound by something beyond explanation. "Let's go home," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The storm clouds were gathering again on the horizon, promising another onslaught. They needed to reach the cabin before it hit. The journey back to the cabin tested Evelyn's endurance to its limits. Shadow, though conscious, could barely stand, and the makeshift sled she'd created from her coat dragged heavily through the deepening snow. By the time the familiar silhouette of her cabin appeared through the trees, twilight was falling, and Evelyn's muscles screamed in protest. "Almost there," she encouraged Shadow, though her own strength was failing. The lynx's eyes had closed again, his breathing shallow but steady. Inside the cabin, Evelyn worked quickly, stoking the banked fire in the wood stove and creating a comfortable bed of blankets near its warmth. She carefully transferred Shadow to this nest, then set about cleaning his wounds properly. The trap had left deep gashes in his leg, angry and inflamed despite her earlier first aid efforts. "This isn't good," she murmured, applying the last of her antibiotic ointment. The infection was severe, and her limited medical supplies weren't sufficient. Shadow needed professional care, veterinary care, which meant doing something Evelyn had avoided for 3 years, returning to Pinecrest. The thought of facing the town and its inhabitants sent a spike of anxiety through her. She had deliberately cut ties with that world, choosing isolation over the pitying glances and awkward conversations that followed her everywhere after James's accident. The only person from town she still saw regularly was Jack, and even those visits were limited to his monthly supply runs and welfare checks. But Shadow's life was worth more than her discomfort. Decision made, Evelyn went to her rarely used phone and dialed the only number she knew by heart. "Ranger Station, Peterson speaking." Jack's voice was a gruff rumble, comfortingly familiar. "Jack, it's Evelyn Morgan. I need your help." There was a startled pause before he responded. "Evelyn, you actually used the phone? Must be the apocalypse." Despite everything, she smiled. "Not quite. I found an injured lynx. He's been caught in an illegal trap. He needs veterinary care immediately." "A lynx? Jesus, Evelyn, those are dangerous predators. You should have called Fish and Wildlife, not brought it into your home. He's not just any lynx. He's been visiting me for years. Please, Jack. He's dying." Something in her voice must have conveyed her desperation, because Jack's tone softened. "All right. Dr. Susan Blackwell in town is the only vet with wildlife experience. I'll call ahead, then come up with the snow truck to get you both down the mountain. Can you hang on for a couple of hours?" Relief flooded through Evelyn. "Yes, thank you, Jack." While waiting, Evelyn managed to get Shadow to drink some water and even take a few bites of the shredded venison she offered. His amber eyes followed her movements, and occasionally, when she spoke to him, his ears would twitch in response. The intelligence in his gaze remained undimmed despite his weakened state. "Jack's coming to help," she told him, stroking the soft fur between his ears. "He's a good man, even if he thinks I've gone completely mad, living up here alone." True to his word, Jack arrived just as darkness fell completely, his powerful snow truck cutting through the drifts with ease. He entered the cabin cautiously, eyes widening at the sight of the lynx lying so docilely among Evelyn's blankets. "I've seen a lot in 20 years as a ranger, but this..." He shook his head in disbelief. "You sure this isn't some exotic pet?" "Ev, he's acting more like a house cat than a wild predator." "He's wild," Evelyn assured him, gathering supplies for the journey. "Just different. Will you help me carry him to the truck?" Together, they carefully transferred Shadow to the back of Jack's vehicle, where Evelyn had created another nest from blankets. Throughout the bumpy descent to Pinecrest, she sat beside the lynx, one hand resting lightly on his side, monitoring each breath. Pinecrest hadn't changed much in the 3 years since Evelyn had last visited. The small mountain town still consisted of a main street lined with storefronts, their windows now decorated for the approaching Christmas season. Snow fell gently on the wooden boardwalks, and despite the late hour, lights glowed warmly from the windows of Mabel's Diner and the Pinecrest Tavern. Dr. Blackwell's veterinary clinic sat at the edge of town, a modern building that contrasted with Pinecrest's frontier aesthetics. The veterinarian herself was waiting at the door, a tall woman with prematurely silver hair and sharp, assessing eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Jack filled me in," she said by way of greeting, her gaze moving past Evelyn to the truck where Shadow lay. "Let's get him inside before you tell me how a reclusive wildlife photographer ended up best friends with a Canada lynx." The clinic's examination room was brightly lit and immaculately clean. Dr. Blackwell worked efficiently, examining Shadow, with gentle but professional detachment, while Evelyn hovered anxiously nearby. "Illegal trap, you said?" The vet's mouth tightened as she cleaned the wounds. Evelyn nodded. "In the protected area near Miller's Ravine. I thought all that land was part of the Conservation Trust." "It is." Dr. Blackwell frowned, administering an injection of antibiotics. "But we've been seeing an uptick in poaching and illegal trapping over the past few months. Someone's been offering cash for lynx and wolf pelts. There's still a black market for that sort of thing." Anger flared in Evelyn's chest. Who's buying? That's the question, isn't it? Dr. Blackwell sighed. "Your friend here is lucky. The wounds are infected, but the trap didn't break any bones. With antibiotics and rest, he should recover fully." Relief washed over Evelyn. "Thank you. When can I take him home?" "Home?" Dr. Blackwell raised an eyebrow. "Evelyn, he's a wild animal. Now that he's receiving treatment, I should really call Fish and Wildlife. They have rehabilitation facilities equipped to handle—" "No!" Evelyn's voice was sharp. "He's not going to a facility. He's coming home with me." Jack, who had been silent during the examination, stepped forward. "Ev, be reasonable. Susan's right. A lynx belongs in proper wildlife care, not a cabin." "You don't understand," Evelyn insisted, her hand finding Shadow's head in a protective gesture. "He's not just any lynx. He saved me in more ways than I can explain. I'm not abandoning him to some facility where they'll treat him like a specimen." Dr. Blackwell studied her for a long moment, then glanced at Shadow, who, despite his sedated state, had shifted slightly to press against Evelyn's hand. "I've been a wildlife veterinarian for 20 years, she said slowly, "and I've never seen a wild predator respond to a human the way this lynx responds to you. It defies everything I know about these animals." She paused, then seemed to come to a decision. "I'm probably going to regret this, but he can stay here for 48 hours, while the IV antibiotics do their work. After that, if he's stable, you can take him back to your cabin for the remainder of his recovery, provided you bring him in for follow-up checks." "Thank you," Evelyn breathed. "I promise I'll bring him back for checkups." "You'll need to stay in town," Jack pointed out. "There's another storm system moving in tomorrow. The mountain roads will be impassable for at least a few days." The thought of remaining in Pinecrest, surrounded by people and their questions, made Evelyn's skin crawl. But Shadow's needs came first. "Is the old motel still open?" "Marge and Hank still run it," Jack confirmed. "I'll drive you over after. We're done here." The Pine Haven Motel was a relic from the 1950s, its neon sign flickering weakly in the snowy night. Marge Wilkins, a plump woman with a perpetually worried expression, did a double-take when Evelyn walked into the office. "Evelyn, Morgan? Good heavens, we thought you'd turned into a mountain hermit for good." She bustled around the counter to grasp Evelyn's hands. "How are you, dear? It's been years." Evelyn forced a smile, acutely uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm fine, Marge. Just need a room for a few nights while a friend recovers at the vet clinic." Curiosity sparked in Marge's eyes, but to her credit, she didn't pry further. "Room 7's free. Got the best heater in the place. You look half frozen, poor thing." The motel room was exactly as Evelyn remembered from her first week in Pinecrest. When she'd been scouting locations for wildlife photography, knotty pine walls, faded floral bedspread, and a small kitchenette that had seen better days, she collapsed onto the bed, the events of the past 24 hours catching up to her all at once. Sleep came in fitful bursts, her dreams filled with Shadow's amber eyes and the metallic gleam of illegal traps hidden in snow. She awoke at dawn, her body stiff from the previous day's exertions, but her mind clear with purpose. She needed to check on Shadow, and then she needed answers about the illegal trapping on protected land. The morning brought another surprise. The UAE town was buzzing with news of her return. As Evelyn made her way to the clinic, she felt the weight of curious stares, heard the hushed whispers that followed her progress down Main Street. That's her, the widow who went crazy after her husband's accident, but lives all alone up in the mountains now. Heard she brought in some kind of wild animal last night. Evelyn kept her gaze fixed ahead, shoulders squared against the gossip. Pinecrest had always been like this, a place where everyone knew, everyone's business, where stories grew and twisted with each retelling. Dr. Blackwell greeted her with good news. "Your Lynx friend is responding well to treatment. Fever's down, infections retreating. He's even eaten a little this morning." Shadow was indeed looking better, his eyes brighter as Evelyn approached his enclosure. He made a soft, chirping sound. When he saw her, a greeting she'd heard many times on her cabin porch. "Hey, boy," she said softly, opening the cage to stroke his head. "Feeling better?" Dr. Blackwell watched this interaction with undisguised fascination. "I've worked with Lynx before, but I've never seen behavior like this. It's almost as if he understands you." "He does," Evelyn said simply. "Dr. Blackwell." "Susan, please." "Susan, what more can you tell me about these illegal traps? Who's setting them and why now, after all the conservation work that's been done in these mountains?" Susan's expression darkened. "It started about 6 months ago. First it was just rumors, trappers finding their legal sets tampered with, new trails cut through protected areas. Then we started getting injured wildlife, a wolf in September, 2 bears in October, and now your lynx. But who's behind it? Surely someone in town must know something." Susan hesitated, glancing toward the clinic's front windows as if checking for eavesdroppers. "There's talk that Westridge Developments is behind it. They've been trying to buy up land around Pinecrest for years, want to build some luxury resort. Mayor Franklin has been fighting them off, but lately," she shrugged, "money talks, especially in small towns during economic downturns." Evelyn frowned. "What does trapping have to do with development plans? Think about it. What's Pinecrest's main claim to fame? Our pristine wilderness and thriving wildlife. If that starts to disappear, if people stop coming to see the wolves and bears and lynx, then there's less reason to protect the land," Evelyn finished, the pieces falling into place. "And more reason to sell to developers promising jobs and tourism." Susan nodded grimly. That's the theory some of us are working with. But proving it? That's another matter entirely. Evelyn looked down at Shadow, who was watching their conversation with uncanny attention. I found his trap near Miller's Ravine. That's Conservation Trust land, isn't it? Should be. It was part of the agreement James helped negotiate before. Susan stopped abruptly, her expression softening with regret. Before his accident, Evelyn finished quietly. It's okay. You can say it. James had been instrumental in establishing the Bitterroot Conservation Trust, working tirelessly with environmental groups to protect thousands of acres from development. His death had occurred during a routine inspection of new trust acquisitions, a fall that had seemed like a tragic accident at the time. But now, with illegal traps on trust land and developers circling, Evelyn couldn't help but wonder if there might have been more to the story than she'd been told. I need to see the mayor, she said suddenly, a new determination hardening her voice, and I need to look at the Conservation Trust maps. Pinecrest's town hall was a stately brick building that had once served as a courthouse during Montana's territorial days. Mayor Eleanor Franklin's office occupied the entire second floor, a space filled with maps of the surrounding wilderness, framed conservation awards, and photographs of the mayor with various political figures. Eleanor herself was exactly as Evelyn remembered, a formidable woman in her 60s with a silver-streaked bob and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone used to being the smartest person in any room. She looked up from her desk when Evelyn entered, surprise flashing briefly across her features before being replaced by a warm smile. "Evelyn Morgan," she said, rising to extend her hand. "This is an unexpected pleasure. Jack mentioned you were back in town temporarily." "Hello, Eleanor." Evelyn accepted the handshake, noting the strength in the older woman's grip. "I need to talk to you about the Conservation Trust lands, specifically the area around Miller's Ravine." Eleanor's smile dimmed slightly. "Straight to business, I see. Please sit down." She gestured to a chair before returning to her own seat. "What's your interest in Miller's Ravine?" "I found a lynx trap there yesterday. An illegal trap on what I thought was protected land." "A lynx?" Eleanor frowned. "That's the third protected predator found in illegal traps this season. Dr. Blackwell reported the others to me. This is becoming a disturbing pattern." Susan mentioned something else disturbing: Westridge Developments trying to buy land around Pinecrest. Eleanor's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Westridge has made several offers for various parcels, yes. All have been rejected thus far. We value our wilderness heritage in Pinecrest." "Thus far," Evelyn echoed. "Meaning that might change?" The mayor sighed, removing her reading glasses to polish them methodically. "Evelyn, you've been away for 3 years. Things have changed in Pinecrest. The pandemic hit our tourism industry hard. The sawmill closed last year. 50 jobs lost. People are struggling." "So you're considering selling out to developers?" "I'm considering all options that might help this town survive," Eleanor corrected sharply. "Westridge is proposing an eco-resort, limited environmental impact, sustainable building practices, local employment opportunities. It's not the conservation nightmare you're implying." "And what about the illegal trapping? The timing seems convenient. Protected wildlife starting to disappear just as developers come knocking." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation, Evelyn. Do you have any proof linking Westridge to the trapping?" "Not yet," Evelyn admitted. "But I'd like to see the trust maps, the exact boundaries of the protected areas." After a moment's consideration, Eleanor nodded and moved to a large cabinet filled with rolled maps. She extracted one and spread it across her desk, weighing the corners with paperweights. "Here's the current trust boundary," she said, tracing a red line with her finger. "Miller's Ravine is here, well within the protected zone." "Where exactly? Did you find the trap?" Evelyn leaned forward, studying the topographical features. "Here, near the fork where Miller's Creek joins the east tributary." Eleanor frowned. That's definitely trust land. This is concerning. Who has access to these areas? Who might be setting these traps? That's what's puzzling, Eleanor admitted. The trust lands are patrolled regularly by conservation officers. Illegal trapping of this scale would require significant access and local knowledge. She hesitated, then added, "There have been rumors about Marcus Trent." "The hunting guide?" Eleanor nodded. "He's been vocal about his opposition to the predator protection programs, claims wolves and lynx are decimating game populations, hurting his business. But Marcus is a third-generation Pinecrest resident. I find it hard to believe he'd resort to illegal trapping." Evelyn remembered Marcus from her early days in Pinecrest, a gruff, bearded man who ran guided hunting expeditions from his outfitting store on Main Street. He and James had clashed occasionally over conservation issues, but their disagreements had always remained civil. "I'd like to speak with him," Evelyn decided. "Tread carefully," Eleanor warned. "Marcus has a lot of support in this town, especially among the hunting community." Leaving the town hall, Evelyn felt eyes following her as she made her way down Main Street. Her years of isolation had made her hyper-aware of attention and Pinecrests. Residents seemed determined to provide it in abundance. Whispers followed in her wake, theories about her sudden return circulating like falling snow. Trent's outfitters occupied a large storefront with a worn wooden sign depicting a bull elk. The windows displayed hunting rifles, camping gear, and taxidermied animals in dramatic poses. A bell jangled as Evelyn pushed open the door, stepping into the warm, leather-scented interior. Marcus Trent stood behind the counter, his beard now more grey than brown, his frame still imposing despite the passage of years. He looked up at the sound of the bell, recognition dawning slowly in his weathered face. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, setting aside the fishing reel he'd been repairing. "Evelyn Morgan, back from the wilderness." His tone was neutral, giving away nothing of his feelings about her return. "Hello, Marcus," Evelyn said, approaching the counter. "I need to talk to you about something." "If it's about that lynx you brought in, the whole town's already talking." He folded his arms across his chest. "Didn't take you for the type to keep wild predators as pets." "He's not a pet," Evelyn replied evenly. "And that's not what I'm here to discuss. I found him caught in an illegal trap on trust land, Miller's Ravine." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, surprise perhaps, or wariness. "That's so. Shame about the animal, but I don't see what it has to do with me. I hear you've been vocal about the predator protection programs." Marcus's expression hardened. "I've made no secret of my views. These mountains had a natural balance before the government started micromanaging wildlife. Now we've got wolves taking down calves on ranches and lynx decimating the rabbit population that smaller predators depend on. Enough to start trapping them illegally. Is that an accusation?" Marcus's voice dropped dangerously. "A question," Evelyn clarified. 3 protected predators found in illegal traps in as many months seems more than coincidental." Marcus leaned forward, his palms flat on the counter. "Let me be clear, Evelyn. I follow the law, even laws I disagree with. I don't set illegal traps, and I certainly don't poach protected species." He paused, then added, "But I'm not the only one with concerns about predator numbers. Half the hunters in this county think the conservation policies have gone too far. Any of them angry enough to take matters into their own hands?" "You'd have to ask them." Marcus straightened, his posture defensive. "Now, if you're done accusing me of crimes, I've got a business to run." Evelyn held his gaze a moment longer, searching for deception. Finding none she could definitively identify, she nodded and turned to leave. At the door, a new thought struck her. "One more thing, Marcus. What do you know about Westridge Developments?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "The resort? People? Not much. They came through about 6 months ago, held some meetings at the lodge. Fancy suits, fancier promises." "You don't sound impressed," Marcus snorted. I've seen their type before. They'll promise jobs and prosperity, then bring in their own people and leave the locals with minimum wage service positions, if we're lucky. Today, so you're against the development? I'm against anything that changes these mountains for the worse, he said bluntly, whether that's too many predators or too many tourists. He paused, his expression softening slightly. For what it's worth, your husband felt the same way, even if we disagreed on the methods. The mention of James sent an unexpected pang through Evelyn's chest. Yes, she said quietly. He did. Outside, the afternoon had brought heavier snowfall. Evelyn pulled, her coat tighter, considering her next move. Marcus hadn't given her the answers she'd hoped for, but his mention of the meetings at the lodge offered a new lead. The Bitterroot Lodge sat at the edge of town, a sprawling log structure that served as Pinecrest's only upscale accommodation. During the winter season, it catered to wealthy skiers and snowmobilers seeking both luxury and wilderness experiences. If Westridge had held meetings anywhere in town, the lodge would have been the natural choice. The lobby was warm and inviting, dominated by a massive stone fireplace where a fire crackled pleasantly. Holiday decorations adorned the rustic beams, and soft music played from hidden speakers. Behind the reception desk, Lisa Reynolds, Jack's younger sister, looked up with a professional smile that quickly transformed into genuine surprise. Evelyn! Oh my gosh, it really is you. She rushed around the desk to envelop Evelyn in an enthusiastic hug. Jack told me you were in town, but I hardly believed it. Despite her general discomfort with physical contact, Evelyn returned the embrace. Lisa had always been kind to her, even in the difficult days after James's accident. It's good to see you, Lisa, she said, meaning it. You're still working here? Assistant manager now, Lisa beamed, gesturing to her name badge. What brings you to the lodge? Please tell me you're finally ready to rejoin civilization. That mountain cabin can't be comfortable in winter. Actually, I'm looking for information. I heard Westridge Developments held meetings here recently. Lisa's smile dimmed slightly. Oh, them. Yes, about 6 months ago, and then again last month. They rented our conference room, brought in catering from Missoula rather than using our kitchen. She wrinkled her nose in disapproval. Very corporate, very intense. Do you remember who attended those meetings? Lisa thought for a moment. The usual suspects, Mayor Franklin, of course, the town council members, a few of the larger property owners from around the area. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. And Robert Chen, he's James's replacement at the Conservation Trust. Between us, he doesn't seem nearly as committed to the cause as James was. This was news to Evelyn. She'd had no contact with the Conservation Trust since James's accident, having transferred her portion of their joint donation to the organization's general fund. Robert Chen. I don't think I know him. Came in about 2 years ago. Very smooth, very polished. City boy trying to play mountain man, if you ask me. Lisa glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. He actually had private meetings with the Westridge people, separate from the group sessions. Evelyn's interest sharpened. Is he in town now? Should be. The trust has an office above the old hardware store. They're usually open until 5. Thanking Lisa, Evelyn headed back into the snowfall. The Conservation Trust office was only a few blocks away, housed in a renovated second-floor space that James had helped secure years ago. A small plaque beside the door acknowledged his contribution. In memory of James Morgan, wilderness advocate, the sight of which sent another bang through Evelyn's heart. Inside, a receptionist looked up from her computer. Can I help you? I'd like to speak with Robert Chen, please. Do you have an appointment? No, but Evelyn Morgan. A man emerged from an inner office, extending his hand with practiced charm. I thought I recognized your voice. Robert Chen, it's an honor to meet you at last. Robert Chen looked nothing like Evelyn had expected. Where James had been rugged and unpretentious, Chen was polished and urbane, his outdoor apparel appearing too new, too carefully selected to convey an image rather than serve a practical purpose. "Mr. Chen." Evelyn shook his hand briefly. "I'm surprised you recognize me. Your photographs of the Bitterroot Wilderness are legendary," he said smoothly. "And of course, your husband's contributions to our work were invaluable. Please, come into my office." Chen's office had once been James's, but all traces of her husband had been erased. Where James had displayed local wildlife photographs and topographical maps, Chen had modern art and framed certificates. The only remaining feature was the large picture window overlooking the mountains. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Morgan?" Chen asked, gesturing for her to take a seat across from his desk. "I found a lynx caught in an illegal trap on trust land yesterday," Evelyn said, watching his reaction carefully, "near Miller's Ravine." Chen's expression shifted to one of appropriate concern. How disturbing. Was the animal harmed? "He's recovering at the veterinary clinic. This is apparently the third such incident in recent months." "Yes, we've been monitoring the situation closely," Chen nodded. "Unfortunately, despite our best efforts, some individuals persist in illegal activities on trust lands. Rest assured, we're working with local authorities to identify the culprits." "Are you?" Evelyn asked bluntly. "Because from what I've heard, not much progress has been made." Chen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Conservation. Work is often 2 steps forward, 1 step back, as I'm sure you know. We're doing everything we can with limited resources, including meeting privately with Westridge Developments." The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples of tension spreading across Chen's carefully composed features. "Ah," he said after a moment. "I see you've been catching up on local gossip." "Is it gossip?" "Not at all. As the Trust's director, I meet with many potential partners and stakeholders. Westridge has expressed interest in developing certain non-protected areas adjacent to trust lands. My job is to ensure any development respects our conservation boundaries and goals. And does their proposal respect those boundaries?" Chen steepled his fingers. "Their initial proposal did not. Their revised version shows more promise. So you're considering it?" "The Trust considers all proposals that might advance our long-term mission." Chen's tone remained even, professional. "Sometimes that means strategic compromises." "James didn't believe in compromising with developers," Evelyn said, unable to keep her edge from her voice. "With all due respect, Mrs. Morgan, conservation strategies must evolve with changing realities." James's passion was admirable, but perhaps not always practical in today's economic climate. Chen leaned forward. "The Trust can protect far more wilderness with adequate funding than we can without it. Strategic partnerships, like the one Westridge is proposing, could provide that funding. At what cost? A small portion of land adjacent to the existing resort area. Land that, frankly, has limited ecological value compared to the high alpine regions. The additional funding would help us protect." Evelyn studied Chen, trying to reconcile his smooth rhetoric with her instinctive distrust. "And Miller's Ravine? Is that part of this small portion you're willing to sacrifice?" Something flickered behind Chen's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. "Miller's Ravine remains firmly within protected boundaries. It's not part of any development discussion." "Then why are protected predators being trapped there?" "As I said, we're investigating." Chen glanced at his watch. "I apologize, but I have another appointment shortly. Is there anything else I can help you with?" Evelyn recognized the dismissal, but wasn't quite ready to leave. "One last question. Did you know my husband well, Mr. Chen?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I never had the pleasure of meeting James personally. I was brought in after his unfortunate accident." accident, Evelyn repeated softly. Yes, that's what everyone called it. Chen's expression shifted subtly, a flash of something, caution perhaps, crossing his features. A tragic loss for the conservation community, he said carefully. And of course, for you personally. Evelyn stood, sensing she would get nothing more from this conversation. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chen. I'll be staying in town for a few days while my lynx friend recovers. Perhaps we'll have a chance to speak again. Your lynx friend, Chen echoed with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. How remarkable. I look forward to hearing more about this unusual relationship. As Evelyn departed the trust office, snow was falling more heavily, obscuring the mountains that had been visible from Chen's window. She paused on the street below, mentally reviewing the conversations she'd had thus far. No one had given her clear answers, yet she sensed connections between the traps, Westridge's development plans, and perhaps even James's accident. The sound of her name being called pulled her from these thoughts. Jack's snow truck was pulling up beside her, its chains crunching in the accumulated snow. There you are, he said, leaning across to open the passenger door. Susan's been trying to reach you. Something's happened with your lynx. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs as Jack sped through Pinecrest's snowy streets. What happened? Is Shadow? He's alive, Jack assured her, navigating around a slow-moving snowplow. But Susan said he's agitated, won't let anyone near him. Started acting strange about an hour ago. Relief mingled with fresh concern. Did she say anything else? Just that she needed you there immediately. Jack glanced at her. You want to tell me what you've been up to all day? I've been hearing some interesting rumors. Asking questions, Evelyn said simply. About the illegal traps, Westridge Developments, and the Conservation Trust. Jack's expression tightened. Stirring up trouble, in other words. Is it trouble to want answers? 3 protected predators trapped in as many months, developers suddenly interested in Pinecrest, and a conservation director who seems suspiciously open to compromise. Something doesn't add up, Jack. And you think you're going to solve it all in a day? Jack shook his head. Ev, you've been living in isolation for 3 years. You can't just drop back into town and start interrogating everyone. Why not? Sometimes an outsider sees things more clearly. Because people talk, Evelyn, and they're already talking about you, the crazy mountain woman who communes with lynxes. The words stung more than Evelyn cared to admit. Let them talk. Someone has to ask these questions. They arrived at the clinic to find Susan pacing, anxiously in the reception area. Thank God, she said when Evelyn entered. He's been howling for the past hour. I was afraid he'd tear his stitches or hurt himself trying to escape the enclosure. From the back room came a series of distressed yowls, a sound Evelyn had never heard Shadow make before. Let me see him. Shadow was indeed in a state of agitation, pacing the confines of his large kennel despite his injured leg, ears flattened against his head. When he saw Evelyn, he emitted another yowl, pressing against the kennel door with unusual urgency. Hey, boy, she said soothingly, opening the kennel. What's wrong? To everyone's surprise, Shadow immediately limped past Evelyn toward the clinic's front door, looking back at her with that uncanny intelligence she'd come to recognize. He wants to go somewhere, Evelyn realized. He's trying to show me something. You can't be serious, Jack protested. It's nearly dark, there's a snowstorm, and he's an injured wild animal, not Lassie. But Susan was watching Shadow with professional interest. I've worked with wildlife for decades, and I've never seen behavior like this. If he is trying to communicate something, I need to follow him, Evelyn decided, already reaching for her coat. Not alone, you don't, Jack said firmly. If you're determined to do this, I'm coming with you. Shadow's behavior grew more insistent as they prepared to leave, his amber eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. Susan insisted on rechecking his bandages before allowing him outside. His vitals are stable and the antibiotics are working, she reported. But this level of activity isn't ideal for recovery. Whatever he's trying to show you, try to make it quick. Once outside, Shadow moved with surprising speed for an injured animal, limping purposefully down the street. Evelyn and Jack followed in Jack's truck, moving slowly to match the lynx's pace. To Evelyn's surprise, Shadow headed not toward the sea, mountain trails, but toward the edge of town where the old logging road began. "Where's he going?" Jack murmured, squinting through the windshield as snowflakes swirled in the truck's headlights. The logging road, seldom used since the sawmill's closure, wound through dense forest before connecting to a network of service roads used primarily by the Conservation Trust and Forest Service. After a mile, Shadow veered off into the trees, following a barely visible path. "We'll have to go on foot from here," Evelyn said, grabbing her flashlight from her pack. Jack looked dubious, but cut the engine. "I still think this is crazy." Noted. Evelyn was already out of the truck, following the distinctive tracks Shadow left in the fresh snow. The path led them deeper into the forest, eventually emerging onto a small clearing. In the center stood an old Forest Service cabin, its windows dark, a thin plume of smoke rising from the chimney. Shadow had stopped at the edge of the clearing, his posture alert despite his injury. He looked at Evelyn meaningfully, then back. At the cabin. "Someone's in there," Jack whispered unnecessarily. "This is government property, should be empty this time of year." Evelyn studied the cabin, noting the snow-covered vehicle partially hidden behind it, a black SUV with local plates. "Let's get closer." They circled the clearing, staying within the tree line. As they approached the cabin, voices became audible. Two men engaged in heated conversation. Moving carefully to a window partially obscured by overgrown pine branches, Evelyn and Jack peered inside. Robert Chen stood near the cabin's small wood stove, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. Across from him, a man Evelyn didn't recognize, expensively dressed with the confident bearing of executive authority, paced the rustic interior. "This is becoming untenable, Chen," the stranger was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the thin glass. "First the environmental assessment delays, now this woman asking questions about the traps. If she starts connecting dots—" "She won't," Chen interrupted. "Evelyn Morgan is a recluse who talks to animals. No one in town takes her seriously." "She was married to James Morgan," the man countered sharply. "She knows the conservation boundaries better than anyone. If she figures out what we've been doing—" "She won't," Chen repeated. "The trust board meeting is next week. Once they approve the boundary adjustment, Westridge will have legal access to Miller's Ravine and the eastern slopes. The mining can proceed without anyone being the wiser." Evelyn's breath caught. "Mining, not resort development." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Jack leaned closer, whispering, "Miller's Ravine has one of the richest copper deposits in the state. It was specifically included in the trust to prevent mining interests from getting to it." "The traps," Evelyn murmured in sudden understanding. "They're trying to eliminate predators from the area before environmental surveys to avoid protection complications." Inside, the conversation continued. "The mineral rights are worthless if we can't get equipment in," the Westridge man was saying. "And we can't move equipment through federally protected habitat without triggering a full environmental review, which is why we needed the trust to adjust the boundaries," Chen nodded. "Officially classify it as lower value conservation land. Something James Morgan would never have allowed," the executive added grimly. Chen's expression hardened. "Well, James Morgan isn't around to object, is he?" The words sent ice through Evelyn's veins. Jack gripped her arm in warning, but she couldn't tear herself away from the window. "That incident was unfortunate," the Westridge man said carefully, "but necessary for the project to move forward. I don't need to know the details, Chen replied, raising his hands. I just need the commission when the mining rights are secured. Jack tugged urgently at Evelyn's sleeve. We need to go now. But Shadow had other ideas. Whether from pain, instinct, or deliberate intent, the lynx suddenly let out a piercing cry, a sound that cut through the night like a knife. Inside the cabin, both men froze. What was that? The Westridge executive demanded. Chen moved to the window, and Evelyn ducked quickly out of sight, pulling Jack down with her. Through the glass, they heard Chen say, "Probably just a mountain lion. They come down near town during heavy snow." But the damage was done. The men's conversation turned to whispers too low to hear, and moments later, the cabin door opened. Chen emerged, a powerful flashlight in hand, scanning the perimeter. Shadow had already melted into the forest, his tracks quickly filling with fresh snow. Evelyn and Jack remained motionless behind a fallen log, scarcely daring to breathe as Chen's light swept past their hiding place. After what seemed an eternity, Chen returned to the cabin. "Nothing out here, but we should wrap this up. I don't like meeting this far from town." Minutes later, the black SUV's engine rumbled to life. Evelyn and Jack waited until its taillights disappeared down the logging road before emerging from their hiding place. "We need to get to Eleanor," Jack said urgently. "What we just heard." "They were talking about James," Evelyn interrupted, her voice hollow. "Not an accident. Unfortunate, but necessary," he said. Jack's expression softened with concern. "Ev, I know what it sounded like, but we can't jump to conclusions. Let's get back to town, talk to Eleanor, figure this out properly." Shadow appeared from the trees, limping toward Evelyn with evident exhaustion. She knelt beside him, stroking his fur gently. "You knew," she whispered. "Somehow you knew what was happening here." The lynx pressed his head against her hand, in a gesture that seemed almost human in its understanding. Within 48 hours, Pinecrest was transformed. Sheriff Harding, armed with Evelyn and Jack's testimonies and a hastily acquired search warrant, had discovered damning evidence in the Forest Service cabin: geological surveys, falsified environmental reports, and most crucially, communications that strongly implicated Westridge in tampering with the circumstances of James's fatal fall. Chen had disappeared, along with the Westridge executive, but their hasty departure had left behind a trail of evidence that the FBI was now following. With intense interest, the Conservation Trust Board, shocked by the betrayal, had convened an emergency session to reaffirm the protected status of Miller's Ravine and the surrounding wilderness. Through it all, Shadow remained at Evelyn's side, his recovery progressing steadily under Susan's watchful care. By the time the first hints of spring began softening the mountain's snowy grip, the lynx was strong enough to return to the wild. On a clear April morning, Evelyn stood on her cabin porch, watching Shadow explore the surrounding clearing with increasing confidence. His injured leg had healed completely, leaving only the faintest limp as a reminder of their shared ordeal. "You know you're free to go whenever you're ready," she told him softly. "The mountains are calling you back." Shadow paused in his exploration, regarding her with those intelligent amber eyes that had seen through to her soul from their very first meeting. In the months since their discovery at the Forest Service cabin, their bond had deepened in ways Evelyn couldn't explain to others. A connection that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild. The ringing of her satellite phone interrupted the moment. It was Eleanor Franklin calling with news that the Trust Board had unanimously voted to offer Evelyn the position of Conservation Director, a role that would allow her to continue James's work, protecting the wilderness they both had loved. "I don't know, Eleanor," Evelyn hesitated, watching Shadow investigate a pine marten's tracks near the tree line. "I came to these mountains to escape the world, not to rejoin it. And now the mountains have given you a reason to fight for them," Eleanor countered. James would be proud, Evelyn, and I think you know it's the right next step. After ending the call, Evelyn sank into her familiar porch chair, mind racing with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider for years. Shadow approached, silently, settling beside her as he had so many times before. "What do you think?" she asked, scratching behind his tufted ears. "Is it time for both of us to find new purpose?" 2 months later, as summer painted the Bitterroot Mountains in wildflower hues, Evelyn stood in the newly renovated Conservation Trust office in Pinecrest. Maps of the expanded protected areas covered the walls, including the newly designated Shadows Wilderness, a vast tract encompassing Miller's Ravine and the eastern slopes, permanently protected from development. Shadow himself had gradually returned to his wild existence, his visits to Evelyn's cabin becoming less frequent as nature reclaimed him. She didn't mourn this transition. It was as it should be, each of them finding their proper place in the world they shared. On a brilliant June evening, as sunset gilded the mountain peaks, Evelyn sat on her porch steps enjoying the stillness. Movement at the forest's edge caught her attention, Shadow emerging from the trees with his characteristic silent grace. But he wasn't alone. Beside him walked a female lynx, slightly smaller, but with the same watchful intensity. The pair approached. The cabin's clearing, keeping a respectful distance. Shadow's mate remained cautious, but Shadow himself padded forward to briefly touch his head against Evelyn's outstretched hand, a gesture of connection that needed no words. "You've found where you belong," Evelyn said softly, "just as I have." The lynxes departed as silently as they had arrived, slipping back into the gathering dusk. But from that day forward, Evelyn would occasionally glimpse them on the ridgeline above her cabin, watchful guardians of the wilderness they had helped save. One morning in late summer, Evelyn discovered something placed carefully on her doorstep, a perfect lynx paw print pressed into a patch of soft earth, and beside it, her grandmother's silver bracelet that Shadow had tried to return to her during their ordeal in the ravine. Smiling through tears, she fastened the bracelet around her wrist and turned toward the trail leading down to Pinecrest, where the Conservation Trust office awaited. The boundary between wilderness and civilization, between loss and renewal, had never felt more permeable or more precious. Dear listeners, we hope that Evelyn and Shadow's extraordinary journey has touched your heart as deeply as it has touched ours. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most profound connections come when we least expect them, and that healing often arrives in forms we could never anticipate. If you've enjoyed this emotional journey through the Bitterroot Mountains, we have prepared a special playlist of similarly captivating stories that explore the remarkable bonds between humans and the natural world. Find it by clicking the link on your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if Evelyn's transformation from isolation to purpose resonated with you. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore life's complexities and unexpected beauty. We can't wait to read your thoughts in the comments section below. What wilderness would you retreat to if you needed healing? What unexpected friendship has changed your life? Your stories inspire us to keep sharing these powerful narratives. Join us tomorrow for another unforgettable journey.